It's feeling like my boyfriend wants to move in, but I'm not sure how about it when we both own our own homes, and my brother is for now still living with me in mine. Hi. Let me start by saying that my 20s have been quite the whirlwind, a series of lessons etched in both heartbreak and growth. For the majority of those formative years, I was in a relationship that shaped me in ways I never fully understood until I stepped away from it. It was a union marked by its share of highs and lows, leaving me with an acute awareness of what love should and shouldn't feel like. Now, at 26, I find myself in the midst of a new chapter, one that feels healthier, richer, and more mutually nurturing than anything I've experienced before. Life has an uncanny way of throwing surprises my way, and one of those surprises was becoming a homeowner at such a young age. A modest but undeniably charming house became my sanctuary, a place I could truly call my own. It's a decent-sized house, with enough room to host the occasional family gathering and to give my brother a temporary space as he figures out his next steps. Yet, as much as this house represents stability, it's also a reminder of the complex layers my life still carries, a history I share with my ex-husband, who remains, at least legally, tied to its ownership. Then, at the start of this year, something unexpected happened. I met someone. My boyfriend is 31, a few years my senior, and carries a maturity and warmth that caught me off guard in the best possible way. He owns a small home of his own, nestled deeper in the bustling heart of the city. His place is cozy, to be sure, but its walls seem to close in when we're together, as though they're urging us to seek out wider horizons. And so, as the months passed and our connection deepened, we found ourselves spending more and more time at my place. My home, with its sprawling backyard and quiet neighborhood, became our shared retreat from the chaos of the city. It didn't take long for his visits to stretch longer and longer, each one lingering like the sweet echo of a favored melody. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, it was clear he had pseudo-moved in. I say pseudo because there were no grand declarations or official decisions. Instead, it happened naturally, almost imperceptibly at first. His laughter began to fill my kitchen in the mornings as we brewed coffee. His clothes found their way into my closet, first just a shirt or two, and then a whole dryer. His dog, with its wagging tail and boundless energy, claimed a spot by the fireplace, nestled next to my aging cat who had reluctantly but eventually conceded the territory. The rhythm of our lives began to sync, a dance choreographed by the unspoken understanding that we preferred each other's company to solitude. And yet, as much as this newfound closeness felt like a dream, it also stirred questions I wasn't entirely ready to face. This was new territory for me. How do you navigate such uncharted waters, especially when the waves of your past still ripple through your present? As the weeks turned into months, our connection grew stronger, deeper, and more intertwined. It wasn't just the laughter we shared or the way he remembered the little details about me, like how I always had to rearrange the pillows on the couch before settling in. It was the way he made my home feel even more alive. When the holidays approached, we sat together in the living room one evening, sipping tea while the soft glow of the fireplace painted flickering shadows across the walls. That's when he brought it up. "Work's going to slow down soon," he began casually, as though discussing the weather. His voice was calm, but there was a glint in his eyes that hinted at something more. "We usually have a shutdown around the holidays, so I was thinking, it might be a good time to spend some extended time here. You know, really settle in for a bit." I blinked, trying to process his words. Settle in? I hadn't expected him to say it so directly, but the idea wasn't entirely foreign. He had already been spending most nights at my place, his dog was practically a permanent resident, and my brother had even joked about charging him rent. Still, there was something significant about hearing him voice it, about making it official. "Of course," I replied, my lips curving into a smile. "It sounds like a great idea." And it did. The thought of having him around more, of sharing quiet mornings and festive evenings, felt right. Natural. The days that followed were a whirlwind of holiday preparations and the easy rhythm of cohabitation. We decorated the house together, stringing lights along the porch and setting up a modest tree in the living room. He even fixed the wobbly banister on the staircase, a task I had been meaning to tackle for months. My home, once a quiet sanctuary, had transformed into a warm, bustling haven filled with laughter, shared meals, and the occasional chaos of our pets' antics. But amidst the joy, there was a growing undercurrent of something unspoken. It started with his offhand comments about his own house. "I've been thinking about putting it on the market," he said one evening while we were making dinner. He stirred a pot of pasta sauce, his tone almost too casual, as if testing the waters. "It's not really practical anymore, is it? I mean, I'm hardly ever there." I paused mid-chop, the knife hovering above a bell pepper. "Oh," I said, my voice light but curious. "What brought that on?" He shrugged, focusing intently on the sauce. "Just makes sense, doesn't it? The house is small, not really suited for 2 people and 2 pets. Plus, I could get a decent price for it, especially if I make a few updates. Maybe renovate the bathroom or redo the kitchen counters before listing it." The conversation lingered in my mind long after we had finished dinner and cleaned up. It wasn't the idea of him selling his house that unsettled me, it was the way he talked about it. He spoke about the logistics in meticulous detail, how much he could sell it for, when the market would be ideal, which renovations would offer the best return on investment. But what he didn't talk about was the after. Where he'd go. What his next steps would be. Or, more pointedly, if those steps involved moving in with me permanently. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. Was he assuming that my home would naturally become our home? That his presence here, which had started as a temporary arrangement, would quietly shift into something more permanent? And if so, what would that mean for me? For my brother? For the house that, despite its complicated history, I still considered my own? The question swirled in my mind like a storm cloud, threatening to cast a shadow over the festive season. I told myself it wasn't worth worrying about, not yet, anyway. We hadn't had the conversation, and until we did, there was no sense in overthinking. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were hurtling toward a crossroads, one that would force us to confront what this all really meant. And so, I waited, hoping that clarity would come with time, or that he'd give me a glimpse of the picture he was painting in his mind, one brush stroke at a time. A part of me couldn't ignore the growing hunch that he was expecting this arrangement to stretch into something far more permanent. The signs were there, subtle but unmistakable. His toothbrush had claimed a spot next to mine in the bathroom. His favorite coffee mug sat comfortably on the kitchen counter, right beside mine, ready for the next morning's brew. The guest room had quietly transformed into storage for some of his extra things, and his dog's bed now occupied a prominent corner in the living room. Yet, as cozy and harmonious as it all seemed, an undeniable weight pressed down on me, urging me to confront the lingering question, what happens next? The truth was, we hadn't really talked about it yet. Not in any meaningful, deliberate way. Sure, we discussed the day-to-day, what to cook for dinner, whose turn it was to take the trash out, but the bigger, scarier questions remained untouched. Questions about our future, about what it meant for him to sell his home, about whether we were heading toward a shared life under this roof or if this was merely a convenient, temporary arrangement. And then there was me. I wasn't sure what I wanted or, more importantly, what I was ready for. I had never been in a relationship that existed in this kind of gray space before. My past had been neatly divided into black and white, into commitments sealed with vows and relationships that ended before they had a chance to get serious. My ex-husband and I had shared everything: a home, finances, plans for the future. That marriage, though ultimately unsuccessful, had given me a roadmap for what it looked like to build a life with someone. It was a roadmap I had clung to, even after the divorce, as a guide for what I thought love and partnership should be. And now, here I was, in uncharted territory with someone who made my heart feel full in ways I hadn't thought possible, but whose presence in my life lacked the clear-cut certainty I was used to. The idea of living with someone without the intention of getting married or at least a plan to move toward marriage was strange to me. Foreign, even. Especially when something as significant as homeownership was involved. A house wasn't just a place to live, it was an anchor, a symbol of stability and permanence. And mine, though cozy and welcoming, carried its own complexities. For one, it wasn't entirely mine, not in the truest sense. On paper, it was still tied to my ex-husband, a detail that felt like a stubborn ghost of a past I was trying to move on from. And then there was my brother, who not only shared the space with me but also contributed financially to the mortgage. Without his support, the weight of this house would be a far greater burden than I could shoulder on my own. I couldn't ignore the practicality of the situation, either. My boyfriend made significantly more than I did, triple my salary, to be exact. If he moved in and took on the financial responsibilities my brother currently handled, it would make life easier in many ways. But at what cost? Would he expect a stake in the house? Would he want his name on the deed? Would that create a tangled web of obligations that neither of us could untangle if things didn't work out? The questions piled up, one after another, each one heavier than the last. And beneath it all, a quiet but insistent fear lingered. What if this arrangement turned into something I wasn't ready for? What if we drifted into a version of permanence that lacked the foundation of certainty I craved? But even as these doubts swirled in my mind, there was another voice, softer but no less powerful, urging me to trust. Trust in the bond we had built, in the way we fit together so effortlessly. Trust that he wasn't just looking for convenience, but for a genuine partnership. Trust that the love we shared could guide us through the uncertainties, even if the path ahead wasn't yet clear. Still, trust wasn't enough to silence the nagging voice that demanded answers. And as much as I wanted to believe we could continue coasting along in our cozy, harmonious bubble, I knew that sooner or later, we would need to have the conversation. The one that would strip away the assumptions and force us to confront the reality of what we wanted and what we were willing to give. For now, though, I pushed the questions aside and tried to savor the moments we shared. The quiet mornings spent sipping coffee together. The way his laughter filled the house, making it feel more like a home. The comfort of his presence, even when words weren't necessary. I wasn't ready to confront the future just yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the future came knocking, demanding to be let in. As I mentioned earlier, my brother lives with me, and his presence has been both a comfort and a necessity. He's more than just my sibling. He's been my unwavering support system through everything: the marriage, the divorce, the highs and the lows. Practically speaking, his financial contribution to the mortgage has been the glue holding everything together. Without him, managing this house, my safe haven, would have been a far greater challenge than I was ready to admit. But even this arrangement was starting to shift. My brother had been working hard to secure his own place, a smaller starter home where he could begin to build his own version of independence. He had spoken excitedly about the prospect of owning a property, weighing the benefits of living there versus renting it out to grow his savings. It was bittersweet to imagine the house without him, quieter, emptier, but I knew it was the right move for him. He deserved his own space, just as I had claimed mine. Yet his departure left a significant question hanging in the air, one I couldn't ignore. If my boyfriend were to move in, what would that mean for this house and for me? He made triple my salary, a fact that had come up more than once in passing conversations. Covering what my brother contributed to the mortgage, or even a little more, would be effortless for him. Financially, the arrangement made perfect sense. But emotions aren't bound by the neat logic of spreadsheets and budgets, and my heart wrestled with a tangle of concerns. Would his financial contribution mean he'd want a stake in the house? Would his name go on the deed, transforming what had been my sanctuary into something shared? The thought made my stomach twist in knots. It wasn't just about the logistics. It was about what this house represented. It was my space, my hard-won victory, a symbol of resilience after everything I'd been through. Sharing it was one thing, but relinquishing part of it felt like a line I wasn't ready to cross, at least not yet. Complicating matters further was the reality that the house was still technically CO-owned with my ex-husband. That legal tether was another ghost of the past, one I hadn't yet figured out how to sever. The idea of introducing my boyfriend into this tangled web of ownership felt precarious, like adding a new thread to a knot already too tight to untangle. How could I ensure that everyone, my boyfriend, my brother, and even myself, was financially protected? And just as importantly, how could I protect the emotional space this house represented for me? I knew that to move forward, I needed clarity, both from him and for myself. We couldn't keep dancing around these questions indefinitely. If my boyfriend wanted to sell his home and move in with me, we needed to have an open, honest conversation, not just about the logistics, but about what this step truly meant for both of us. Was this a practical solution to our living situation, or was it a step towards something deeper and more permanent? And if it was the latter, was I ready for that? The thought of broaching the subject filled me with equal parts dread and determination. I didn't want to ruin the delicate harmony we had built, but I also knew that avoiding the conversation wouldn't make the questions disappear. If anything, it would only make the uncertainties grow louder, casting a shadow over the love we had worked so hard to nurture. And so, one evening, as we sat together on the couch, the fire crackling softly in the background, I turned to him and took a deep breath. "We need to talk," I began, my voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. He looked at me, his expression curious but patient, waiting for me to continue. "I love having you here," I said, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. "And I love what we're building together. But if we're going to take this next step, if you are really thinking about selling your house and moving in, I think we need to talk about what that means for both of us." His face softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. "I've been meaning to talk to you about this too," he admitted. "I didn't want to assume anything or pressure you, but I've been thinking about what our future might look like. And I want to make sure we're on the same page." And just like that, the knot in my stomach began to loosen. It wasn't an easy conversation. It was filled with what-ifs, maybes, and careful considerations. We talked about finances, about boundaries, about what we wanted our shared life to look like. I told him about my concerns with the house, about the lingering ties to my ex-husband, about my fears of losing the independence I had fought so hard to reclaim. And he listened. Really listened. By the time the conversation ended, I didn't have all the answers. But I had clarity where it mattered most. We were in this together, navigating the complexities one step at a time. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Because no matter what the future held, whether he moved in, whether the house became ours or remained mine, I knew we would face it together, with love, respect, and the understanding that had brought us this far.